Okay. All right, here we go. This was the focus of our recent trip, 10 days exploring the Four Corners area, the Anasazi, or the Chacoan. Almost seems to be synonymous terms for the same group, the ancient ones.
Where did the word Anasazi come from?
Oh, it's probably a Pueblo word, which means what I have in quotes, the ancient ones. The ancient ones is how they refer to them. The Pueblo people are the Zunis, the Hopis. I believe the Paiutes are Pueblo, the Utes, and they're common, they have affiliated languages. And they were the groups that migrated into that Four Corners area between the 13 and 1500s. And by that time, the Anasazi had come, done their thing, and departed. So the connections between the modern Pueblo people and the Anasazis, there probably were cultural connections and ethnic connections, but those are still being worked out. In any case, they called them the Anasazi, which were the ancient ones, the ones that were there before them, the ones who left behind the infrastructure that I'm introducing you to. Now, this Anasazi was instrumental in discovering the astronomy of the Anasazi culture when back in the 1970s she discovered the sun dagger, which I'm going to show you. Anyways, in 1983, after she had been studying the astronomy for over half a decade, she wrote an article on the astronomical markings at 3 sites on Fajada Butte. And I'm going to show you a picture of Fajada Butte. But in any case, she said that a 7-year study of prehistoric Pueblo sites of the Chaco culture has revealed that these people possessed a sophisticated astronomy. Evidence of this prehistoric astronomy consists of multiple light markings on petroglyphs and of several alignments of major structures. From about 900 to 1150 AD, Chaco Canyon was the center of a complex prehistoric Pueblo society that thrived in the arid environment of northwestern New Mexico. The Chacoan people planned and constructed large multi-story structures, ceremonial centers, and extensive roads throughout the 70,000 square kilometer San Juan Basin. These achievements indicate sophisticated engineering and surveying skills. Now, when we go back to when this was being discovered in the 1980s, at the same time, about this period, from the mid-70s up until the early 90s, was a major period of rethinking about a lot of ancient cultures, because at the same time that this lady here now has been discovering that there was a sophisticated astronomy and an engineering and so forth going on at Anasazi, other archaeologists, astronomers, and so forth were making groundbreaking studies of the megalithic structures in the British Isles. People like John Michel and Alexander Thom and others who were mapping these structures and realizing, Fred Hoyle, several others who did astronomical studies, and discovered that the standing stones, the megaliths, the menhirs, the stone rings, the earthworks, and so forth in the British Isles had a sophisticated astronomy in them. Now, this was understood about Stonehenge way back, going back to Norman Lockyer around the turn of the century. But that was considered to be an anomaly. What happened when people like Alexander Thom and Fred Hoyle and Gerald Hawkins and a lot of these other guys came and started looking at the megalithic stuff in England was that it was really prevalent throughout the whole system, and it was much more sophisticated than anybody had realized. Now, at the same time, you have people down like down in Egypt discovering the sophisticated astronomy at Luxor, at the Giza Plateau, and discovering that many of the same alignments were built into there as were being built into the structures in England. Also, in the 70s and 80s and into the early 90s, you had the same parallel discoveries of the earthworks in eastern United States. The great earthworks talking about the mounds, the earthen rings, and so forth. You had archaeologists and astronomers discovering that there was also embedded in those earthworks of the Mississippi and Ohio valleys this same sophisticated astronomy that she's talking about here. So this is, historically, this is a very important transition in our understanding of ancient cultures, is this slowly dawning realization amongst various academics and researchers and students of antiquities that there's this whole other level of stuff going on there. So again, we could cite numerous parallels. We could say the Mayans, the discoveries with the Mayans, the discoveries with the Incans in South America. In fact, what seems to be the recurring motif is that obsession with the sky, the obsession with celestial cycles and periods and movements and so forth was prevalent all over the ancient world. All over the ancient world. The Polynesian islanders had a very sophisticated astronomy. The Australian, the Aboriginal people of Australia, as it turns out, have a sophisticated astronomy. So this is about the discovery of the same sophisticated astronomy going on in the deserts of southwestern United States and being discovered essentially at the same time all of these other people and students and so forth are discovering it in other places all over the world. And what's interesting too is you look at the dates from AD 900 to 1150. When we begin to look at these periods of extraordinary constructional activity and building activity and developmental activity, what we discover is that, you know, between 11 and 1200 AD, we can name the last great phase of earthwork construction in North America took place. At the same time this is going on, what you're about to see, and I'm only going to show you a small part of it, but it'll give you a sense of what they were up to. But at the same time they're doing that, we find the great ceremonial centers in Mexico and the Yucatan being built. We find the last great phase of the Gothic cathedrals being built in Europe. We find in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam, we find this huge organized activity, this undertaking to build these tremendous ceremonial complexes such as Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom. And guess what? They have the same sophisticated astronomy in them as you've got right here. So you've got these Anasazi people building here in the southwestern United States, laying out these structures and these complexes of structures and laying out roadways to connect them, and the whole thing is recreating a celestial map. Likewise, you go around the other side of the world in Southeast Asia, you have an unknown group of builders coming in and essentially creating the same kind of infrastructure with the same kind of astronomy, the same kind of geometry, the same type of metrology, the same type of geodesy. What am I talking about? When I talk about geodesy, what am I talking about? What is geodesy? Close. What is it? Metrology is the study of measurement. Geodesy is the study of the size and shape of the earth.
So
Got that new term? You should have learned it. We had it a year ago. Everybody forgot. Paul, this is why we have to reiterate. Geodesy. In fact, we had a whole show one night just on geodesy.
Of course we did.
So I think
But
we
you
should
didn't
start
call it
from the
that.
beginning. All
So I'm going to have to shut all this down. Open that one. Okay, I'll repeat that. Geodesy is the study of the size and shape of the earth. What's geomancy?
Oh, that's
That's the study and mapping of the energy patterns
the
within
energy,
the
yeah,
earth.
the Earth energy lines.
Yeah. And metrology is the study of measurement. And why the study of metrology is important is because by studying ancient measurements, you can discover what system of measurements these ancient builders were using. And when you discover and become familiar with the systems of measurement that these ancient builders were using, you discover, and I've shown you some examples, that it appears that there was a single system of integrated measurement being used all over the ancient world, which is a very interesting thing to try to explain. But let us go on. Here's the area in question. I've shown you this, but I don't think you saw this. Did you, Paul? You did? Okay. Well, we have the San Juan Basin. Is this basin right here. And in San Juan Basin is where we find Chaco Canyon. And we had a little quiz, a geography quiz. Anybody want to volunteer? Okay. The first thing Paul's going to point out to you is Grand Canyons. This is so you can get your bearings. Okay, where's Great Salt Lake? There's Great Salt Lake, right? Okay, what is Colorado Plateau?
That is.
Over there.
What is Colorado Plateau?
Give me that.
Where is this? Is this it here?
Top
What is it?
top
All right.
Area.
It's this whole thing right here.
Yeah.
It's this whole thing right here. And where is the Great Basin?
That's here.
Also called the Basin and Range.
Yeah. No.
This is the Basin and Range. Or also known as the Great Basin, this area right here. And that's a very interesting and important area, but we're not going to talk about that tonight. When the Colorado Plateau was uplifted between roughly 5 million and 10 million years ago, that's when all of this erosion started. When you go back to about 12 million, 15, 20 million years ago, the Colorado Plateau didn't exist because this was a sea right here.
It's all underwater.
It was underwater and there were limestones forming. And those limestones, some of those limestone layers are now 1.5 miles above sea level. So once that land started being pushed up, that's when the erosion could start cutting it down. And all around the rim of particularly the southern rim, you see it's all intersected by erosional channels, the biggest of which is Grand Canyon. But then you have a lot of complex basins and so forth. This is the San Juan Basin, which is drained by the San Juan River, which comes up this way and connects to the Colorado right here and then flows on out.
And that goes down, it empties in the...
Yeah, well now, because so much of the river Colorado is being utilized for irrigation, the river never makes it down here to the Gulf of California, which it used to do. It used to drain down here. Now, when the Colorado Plateau was uplifted, this work of erosion started. Okay, once you become familiar with the geology of the Colorado Plateau, and you begin to become aware of the fact that there are huge masses of rock missing that were there when it was first uplifted. The amount of erosional work that's been done on the Colorado Plateau is really almost hard to even believe once you begin to get the big picture of it. But anyways, that's when all of these canyons were cut, all the beautiful canyons of southern Utah and so forth. Yeah, Dennis?
Did the ice sheets ever get that far down?
No. What you had was isolated ice caps on mountains, like for example, San Francisco mountains right here were covered in ice. And some of these mountain ranges up in here had ice caps on the mountains, but you didn't have the massive ice sheet like you did up here. So when those big glaciers up here melted, that meltwater didn't actually affect this area. So really there's no way to attribute the erosion except to rainfall. I mean, that's the only, unless somebody can conjure up another source of water, because in order to cut those canyons you have to have a lot of erosion. In order to have that erosion, you've got to have a lot of water flowing over those rocks. So the source of that water was not melting glaciers, so it had to have been rainfall.
That's good.
Maybe it was the shaman in their rainmaking operations got out of hand. Well, the problem was the canyon cutting started before the humans arrived. However, hominids, human-like animals, not modern humans, but hominids, showed up on the scene about the same time the last cycle of glaciers got underway, which is geologically called the Pleistocene, right? That's how we define the Pleistocene, the onset of the cycle of glaciers. That coincided almost precisely with this sudden emergence of all these two-legged upright creatures that were walking around on the earth, about 14, 15 of them at least. In fact, there's been a new one that's been discovered. I forgot his name. but just within the last few months, a new one was reported, a new small with a very large head.
But there's 14 of them that they know of right now.
At least 14, of which now we're the only one still surviving.
Right.
The only one still surviving. So that's, to me, probably a very crucial relationship or connection between the climate shifts and the emergence of these bigger-brained, two-legged, upright beings.
Where are they located?
Where are they located?
Australia, where?
Oh, mostly in Africa and the Middle East. Mostly in Africa and the Middle East. But in Europe, Neanderthal was in Europe. Okay, so let's continue on here. San Juan Basin, we've got that identified. It's right there. The San Juan Basin is defined by the Chusca Mountains right here and what's called Valles Calderas, which we're going to be coming back to. Bill is right here, Valles Calderas.
Yep. And that looks, you can see it here. It looks like you can see a pretty good sized drainage pattern right in there.
Yes.
Just to the right and below that circle, that looks like a pretty good size, well-defined
Well, it is.
drainage pattern.
This is the Rio Grande Rift.
Man, incredible.
And Rio Grande Rift is a major structural component of the Earth's crust.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the Great Rift in Africa. It's a place where the crust has ripped apart, and the pieces of the crust in that crack have dropped down by a mile or two. Then that has filled up with sediment, and that's what this whole thing is right here. And now the Rio Grande River flows down through here. And this is the San Luis Valley, and at some time around 12,000 years ago or so, there was this, like everywhere else around here, the San Luis Valley turned into a huge lake and catastrophically flowed out its south end, came down here and did some enormous erosion work in the Rio Grande, which if we have time I'm going to show you pictures of that. And here's a black and white version of the same thing we just saw. So we see the head of Grand Canyon. This is what's called the Mogollon Rim down here. This is the rim of the Colorado Plateau. And it's been deeply dissected by these canyons from this huge amounts of runoff coming off of the plateau. And it's down like right in here where you find Sedona and these very magical places.
Where's the crater on there? Where would that be?
Meteor crater?
Yeah.
Let's see if we can see it. It would be, we can't see it on here. It would be right in here somewhere. Right in here.
That's the one with the iron asteroid head.
Yes, it's this. Okay. This is another version where you can see the Four Corners area. Here's Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah. Here's, to get oriented, there's Grand Canyon. And this is the San Juan Basin right here. You can see it does extend up into southern Colorado. But they also had, this Chacoan culture also had outlying communities that reached all the way over to the head of the Grand Canyon. That's the San Juan Basin there. And here's a closer up of the San Juan Basin, and this is Chaco Canyon right in here. You can kind of see this is the head of the San Juan. Well, it's the Chaco River. All of this drains here into the Chaco River, flows out this way into the San Juan River, the San Juan into the Colorado. So all of any water that falls on here, if you were to have a big deluge of a rainstorm over here, all of that water is going to eventually find its way through the Grand Canyon. So in fact, one of the reasons I think the Grand Canyon is as deep as it is because it's fed by such a huge watershed, a huge catchment basin. So there you can see Chaco Canyon, Chusca Mountains, which regretfully I didn't get to because we didn't have time, but the Chusca Mountains are a truly amazing, beautiful, magical place.
But the other thing that's amazing is this stuff, was it the Salmon something ruins and some other stuff. They're exactly north and south of the
Yes.
canyon.
Yes.
And they have roads connecting them.
Yeah, and I'm going to show some of that. Okay, this is a map of the canyon itself, and the green box represents where the greatest concentration of the cultural complex was centered, right in there. And what it seemed was that they had created this vast infrastructure that covered, now estimated to be 80,000 square miles. And it appears that the center of this whole complex was the canyon. And what they did was they created these vast ceremonial structures around the canyon. And then they created a system of dead straight roadways leading out from the canyon. And these then led to what are called by the archaeologists the outliers, which are these complexes that were built on these dead straight roadways. And then also linking the whole thing was this system of signal towers, which I'm going to show you. And here's a closer up of the canyon. And when we look at it, you'll see that the canyon was probably created catastrophically because, for one thing, they've done studies of the sediment in the canyon, and most of the sediment appears to be 10,000 years or less in age. So either the canyon is not much more than 10,000 years old, or whatever was in the canyon was flushed out and then replaced by stuff that's only 10,000 years old. But there's Fajada Butte, which you're going to see a slide of shortly. Fajada Butte is the location of the sun dagger. And this is the canyon proper, and they have built a series of structures not only on the rim of the canyon, but down in the canyon itself. And here's another aerial photograph of the canyon. And here's Fajada Butte, which is just like a little gateway. One of the ladies on the trip referred to it as a gateway, and I kind of like that, kind of like a gatehouse. But you can almost think of this as the entrance to the canyon. And then the main complexes are up in here. There's some subsidiary ones down here, but the main ones like Pueblo Bonito and Chetroquetl, Pueblo Alto, Pueblo del Arroyo, some of the others, they're all up in here. And I'm going to show you pictures of them so you can begin to see what they look like. This is an interesting, you were talking about alignments, Bill. Up here is a complex of ruins on top of the mesa top. Then right here is Pueblo Bonito, which is in the canyon itself. And then right down here is, it's called Una Vida, yes. So they're on all three on a dead straight alignment.
Yeah.
So the question is what's significant about that
There's
particular
the other
alignment?
one, Wajiji is over just about due east. I don't know if you got a chance to see that, but
No, I didn't.
There might be something very interesting in that area.
I guess I need to go back out there.
Yeah, we all do.
Well-
This is all in the San Juan Basin?
Yes, this is all in Chaco Canyon, and Chaco Canyon is like in the center of San Juan Basin.
And then exactly north of, it's about halfway between Pueblo Bonito and Chetroquetl is the Pueblo Alto that all the roads converge.
Pueblo Alto is right there.
Yeah.
And since I'm not done with this program yet, when I'm done with it, I will have each of these marked. Pueblo
Yeah,
Alto
right.
is right there, which is a complex on the cliff top. And there's a roadway which you don't see on here. In fact, you can barely see it on the ground, but it's there if you know what to look for. There's like a 30 to 40 foot wide roadway that goes precisely due north. And it also continues on the south side of the canyon and goes south. And then below Pueblo Alto, there's a stairway cut into the cliff side to connect. But in any case, they've created a row of these city complexes along this dead straight north-south alignment, just like they've done here. Now, I have not yet had a chance to research to see what the significance of this alignment is, but I would bet $1,000 to anybody that wanted to that it's laid out to an astronomical alignment. Okay, now this is an aerial view of the canyon, and you see Fajada Butte right here, and this is the canyon rim here and here, and it's been filled with sediment, and then that sediment has a gully that's formed in it. This is what actually is what's called an arroyo out west. In the southwest, the term arroyo applies to these gullies that have been cut into they're cut mainly by flash floods. There's no water flowing in here except during a flash flood. And then they're quite erosive. And one reason and these are relatively new. And the reason they're relatively new is that for long periods of time there was more rainfall here. But there have been several periods of drought. Now when there's been more rainfall, like when the Chaco culture was here in the 1100s, 1200s, 1000 AD, there was more rainfall. And there was enough rainfall that there was plants growing on the floor of Chaco Canyon. Well, the vegetation stabilized this alluvium, it's called, so it didn't erode. Well, then there was a drought, and the drought lasted for 50 years. The drought appears to coincide with the disappearance of the Anasazi. But in any case, and there was a period of arroyo cutting, which then terminated until the late 1800s, at which point cattle grazing ate off what vegetation there was, and that inaugurated a new cycle of erosion. But the value of this turned out to be for archaeologists is that by cutting into the alluvial floor of the canyon, it exposed stuff. They were able to go in there and find stuff and learn about the cultures that had been there, because a lot of that stuff goes back, thousands of years. There were people living in this canyon thousands of years ago, and they left behind artifacts, and those artifacts got buried in this floor. But you can see that there's about 100 feet to 200 feet of this alluvial sediment in here. And if you could just take all of that out, and if you think about it, here's the logic of it. If all of that sediment is young sediment, only 10,000 years old or less, then that means that the canyon itself can't be much older than that. Or there was an event that flushed any older stuff out, because basically you go through this alluvium and you get down to bedrock, and what you would expect is if this canyon was millions of years old and had been slowly accumulating sediment over time, there should be many layers getting successively older, going back hundreds of thousands of years. But that's not what they find. What they find is that it's all Holocene, or 10,000-year-old sediment. So what does that imply? It implies either a very young canyon, or that the canyon was eroded and refilled with sediment only 10 or 12,000 years ago. Now all of these may seem like incidental facts, but they'll actually turn out to be significant in trying to decipher what transpired. Now you can see the arroyo, and you can also see Pueblo Bonito right down here at the base of the cliff. So this is Chaco Canyon, what it looks like from above. And again, see, it's got that filling of alluvium. If you cleaned all that out, it would have a rough stone bottom. But see, it's all filled up with this stuff that was probably laid down in mass. I think that's a flaw. But now they do have, sometimes the arroyo has water in it after a thunder shower. It'll carry water.
That looks like water to me, reflecting the sky.
It could be. Okay, so here's Fajada Butte. And here's a photograph, and the sun dagger is found right up there, up top. So they had to, whoever was observing the sun dagger had to climb up.
Wow.
I think it was in 1973. This Anasazi was an artist who was very interested in Indian petroglyphs. So there was a spiral that had been reported seen up here behind some slabs of rock. So I think it was in 1973 on June, very close to the summer solstice, she climbed up there to draw this petroglyph. Well, she was not expecting to see this, and she just happened to be up there at noon drawing when she noticed that there was a sliver of sunlight that was coming through the cracks in the slabs, and it began moving down the wall. So as she watched it, she noticed that it did something very, very interesting. It passed right through the center of this spiral petroglyph that she was drawing. And she thought, this has got to be intentional. This is not an accident. This was, they carefully worked this out, which obviously they did. Now, she went into, ended up studying this thing for many years, and realized that this was just the center of the whole. I mean, this was like her doorway into this whole world of archeo-astronomy. started by seeing this sliver of light, this dagger of light descending down and passing directly dead through the center of this spiral.